Never answer the Eels after 3 a.m., even when they whisper warnings. If I replied, the night doors would seal, and the system would log me inside. The security monitor by my elbow showed the Eel gallery camera, and a second shadow kept sliding across the glass that my eyes couldn't find in the room. My job title said Night Life Support Tech, but I spent half the shift acting like a guard, because my probation paperwork said one more anomaly and I was out. Nothing in that building lied like the safety binder, which is why my hands stayed on the desk until the minute hand crept toward the hour. At 2:58 a.m., the coffee machine on the counter finished its last sputter and went quiet, and the fluorescent strip above the monitor cut off mid-buzz like someone pinched a wire. The badge reader on the wall still blinked green, steady and polite, but at the camera feed flickered once and came back with the little quarantine tag in frame that shouldn't have been there. E3. I had already told my supervisor earlier that night that I did the North Wing walkthrough. The lie sat behind my teeth because the printer jammed again, because I needed to keep the job through sunrise, because the clinic texted that my refill window closed today and the cash price would wreck me. The shift binder lay open under a dried coffee ring, the kind that leaves a brown halo and a crust you can feel under your thumb. Someone had initialed the page in a fast, impatient scrawl and written in marker across the top, revised after the audit, which made my stomach tighten because the audit never meant safety. A laminated card, curling at one corner, had been clipped to the page with a rusty paperclip. It said, "If you hear the Eels whisper, do not answer." The minute rolled over and the Eel gallery speaker, the one meant for daytime tours, clicked once through the wall. The camera feed in the corner of my monitor froze on a frame of dark water and glass, and the shadow on the glass held still like it knew I was staring. I kept my eyes on the monitor because the binder said not to look away once the whisper started, and my stupid habit from an old warehouse job kicked in. I tapped the desk twice, checked the corners of the screen, then checked them again. The only thing that moved was the little E3 tag, swinging slightly, which made no sense because tags don't sway in still air. The second card on the ringed page was half smeared where the coffee had bled ink into fibers. I had to tilt it under the desk lamp to make out the line, and what I saw looked wrong in the way a missing tooth looks wrong. It read, "If you hear the warning, repeat it for the log." No, that couldn't be right. The first card said, "Do not answer," and the second told me to repeat, and the camera was still frozen on black water, while the shadow waited at the edge of glass. The first whisper didn't come through my ears the way a voice does. It came through the desk, through the chair, through the bones in my forearms, like the whole building had decided to hum a sentence. "Keep it off camera." I hadn't noticed it then, but the quarantine tag on the monitor was hung backwards, like someone wanted the letters facing the glass instead of the hallway. The hallway phone rang, a single hard ring that made me flinch and reach, before I remembered the house rule about calls after 3. My palm hovered over the receiver until the ring died, because the last time I answered after hours, the line only played my own breathing back at me. A soft knock came from the service door behind the desk, the one that led into the employee corridor, and my chest went tight because knocks meant someone was out there, alive and bored or scared. The badge reader beeped once without a swipe, and that beep came out thin, almost embarrassed, like the sound got drained. The night custodian's voice came through the door without the intercom. "Open up." Relief hit first, then dread followed right behind it, because the custodian wasn't supposed to be in the building that early. The schedule said deep clean started later, and rules never got written for normal nights. The binder had one more line underlined so hard the pen gouged the paper. It said, "If the Eel Gallery mic is active, do not open employee doors." My fingers twitched toward the latch anyway because leaving someone in the corridor felt like the kind of choice that turns into a headline. And I couldn't live with that even if the building could. The latch was cold enough to sting, and my stress reflex showed up without permission. I wiped my palm on my pants once, then again, like friction could erase the fear. "Hold on," I said, and my voice sounded small in the empty desk area. The custodian knocked again. Slower. "Something is wrong in the eel hall." The word wrong landed like a weight, and my brain tried to bargain with it because I needed this to be a system issue, a sensor glitch, anything with a fix. The camera feed stayed frozen, and the shadow on the glass kept its patient shape. So I slid the deadbolt and cracked the door a few inches, keeping my body behind it like the binder had taught me. The custodian filled the gap in the dim corridor light, hair damp from a mop bucket, breathing too fast for a person who had just walked from the supply closet. The fish talk. "They do not talk," I said, because I needed the sentence to be true. The custodian's eyes stayed on the desk monitor like it was a window. "The eels do." The fluorescent strip above us snapped on again, but the light came with a wrong color, a sickly green cast that made the custodian's skin look gray. The custodian pointed at the frozen camera frame. "That tag is back. E3. The same little tag I'd signed off as removed weeks ago when the quarantine tank got cleared and the paperwork went in the shred bin. Night shifts teach a building has its own habits, and this one had a habit of saving its worst for the hour when help felt farthest away. The custodian stepped inside and the door behind them shut with a soft seal sound, not a slam. The badge reader blinked red for the first time all night, then blinked red again. And my heart sank, because red meant the system had decided. Someone crossed a line. I reached for the desk console to pull up door status, because competence was the only prayer I trusted, and the screen loaded a simple map of the exhibits with the Eel Gallery highlighted. My access icon on the map duplicated. 2 little dots labeled as me, one at the desk and one inside the Eel Gallery. That wasn't a ghost story. That was a log mismatch, and logs were how the building punished people. The custodian swallowed hard. I went into spot mop. I heard talking. A tiny shame spike hit me because my first impulse was to protect myself, not the custodian, and that thought forced my hands to move. I grabbed the radio from the charger, thumbed the talk button, and called the supervisor line like I'd been trained, because hiding this would bury both of us. Static came back, then my own voice, half a second delayed. "Hide this would bury both of us." I let go of the talk button, breathing shallow, because the radio shouldn't loop like that unless the repeater failed. And our repeater sat on the roof with a clear line to town. The custodian stared at the radio like it might bite. A pop-up alert flashed on the console, not with a brand logo, just plain white text on gray that made my throat go dry. It said, "Eel Gallery Audio Active." The binder hadn't mentioned a pop-up, and I felt the pressure in my ribs shift from fear to anger, because the system was adding new rules in real time. A faint vibration rolled through the floor again, and the whisper returned, quieter, like it wanted my attention without the custodian hearing. "Keep it off camera." The custodian's phone buzzed in their pocket, and they flinched, like the vibration hurt. "No service," they muttered, staring at the screen. I had service. I checked because I couldn't help myself. Because every time I get scared, I check the same thing twice, then once more, as if redundancy equals safety. 2 bars, a missed call from the clinic, another from an unknown number that left no voicemail. The guilt hit me sideways because my first thought was my refill, not the custodian, and that made me stand up fast, chair legs scraping the tile. "Stay here," I said. And the words came out sharper than I meant, because sharp words keep panic away for a second. The custodian grabbed my sleeve. "Do not go in there." I didn't correct them. I just nodded because the decision had already formed. If the system thought I was in the Eel gallery anyway, then I might as well confirm where the second dot came from before it became a report with my name on it. The employee corridor door clicked, then clicked again. A mechanical double sound that matched nothing on the map. The laminated card in the binder had a third line, scratched and almost unreadable under the coffee stain, and I leaned close enough to smell old paper and burnt plastic from the desk lamp. It said, "If you hear 2 clicks, leave the corridor." My hand stayed on the radio anyway, because leaving meant abandoning the custodian and letting a false log become a truth. And that felt like the kind of mistake that ruins a life quietly. The hallway to the exhibits ran long and clean, designed for families and strollers, but the staff path behind it was narrow and full of metal doors. The air changed as I walked, getting wetter, heavy with the salt system that fed the marine tanks, and my shoes stuck slightly to the floor where mop water hadn't dried. The first exhibit door, the one to the Ray touch pool, stood closed, but the red exit sign above it had gone dark. Silence wrapped the corridor so hard that my own breathing sounded too loud, and the absence forced me to stop because filtration pumps don't just stop without alarms. My badge hung on my lanyard warm against my chest, and when I tapped it against the reader by habit, the reader didn't beep at all. No green, no red, nothing. A dead reader meant access loss, and access loss meant I was now trapped inside the system that could write my location into existence. The Eel gallery door at the end had a small window cut into it. Through the glass, the gallery looked normal at first glance. Blue tank light, dim floor lamps, the eel habitat rockwork a dark lump behind glass. Then the camera in the ceiling rotated 1 notch on its mount, slow and deliberate, and the window glass caught the reflection of a figure standing where the custodian said no one was. My stomach turned and I told myself sabotage, because sabotage had a culprit, and culprits could be fired. The figure in the reflection didn't move like a person deciding to hide, and that thought made my legs go stiff because I had never worked with a saboteur who moved like that. I backed away from the window and pulled the binder card from my pocket, because I'd torn it out earlier without thinking, like stealing a rule could give me control. The card's corner curled in my hand, slick from my sweat, and the ink felt raised where someone had written the words twice. "If you hear the eels whisper, do not answer." The whisper came again, this time clearer, and it didn't come from the tanks. It came from the wall speaker above the exhibit door, the one wired for daytime narration. "Keep it off camera." My mouth opened on instinct, a reflex from every alarm panel I had ever worked, and I stopped myself just in time. The second card in the binder, the smeared one pressed against my thigh, through my pocket like a hot coal, and I knew that line wanted me to do one specific thing. Repeat it for the log. I chose the human explanation, because fear loves anything that can be fixed, and I forced myself into a test. I crouched by the exhibit door, reached into the maintenance access panel beside it, and flipped the switch that killed audio to the hallway speakers, because the whisper had to be a wiring bleed, a radio loop, something. The speaker went dead, but the whisper kept going anyway, Now inside the glass, inside the water, inside the thin hiss of the filtration returns. Keep it off camera. The moment that landed, my console back at the desk pinged in my pocket through the keychain fob, a tiny vibration alert that should only happen when the system logs a critical event. I hadn't touched the console, but the building had logged something, and I needed to know what before it decided who to blame. The custodian's voice came through the radio, faint and warped, as if someone was pinching the signal. Door behind the desk locked. Stay in the desk zone, I said, and I avoided the words I wanted, the ones that start with a second-person command, because the building didn't need my language to trap me. Do not follow into exhibits. The radio hissed, then my own voice returned, delayed again. Do not follow into exhibits. My throat closed. The system wasn't looping words randomly, it was collecting them. The eel gallery door handle sat under my palm, cold metal with a slight tremor, and I felt it vibrate in tiny pulses timed to the whisper. My brain connected the feeling to a fact I hated. The hydrophone mic in the eel tank, the one used for fun daytime listening, fed into a speaker amplifier that could take any vibration and turn it into sound. I had signed the hydrophone off after hours because policy said it stayed off at night. 3 had been the quarantine tag on that hydrophone line when it malfunctioned, and I had cleared the tag myself, shredded the report, and moved on because I needed a clean night with no anomalies. My lie came back with teeth, and it forced my hand to turn the handle because the quickest way to prove innocence is evidence. The door didn't open, it didn't latch. It simply stayed shut, like the building had decided the eel gallery was no longer a room. A small line of text appeared on the badge reader screen, the kind of tiny display that never shows words, only lights. Tonight it showed a single word in faint block letters. Held. My skin prickled, and I stared at that word until it blurred because held meant someone inside or something inside, and the log already said that someone was me. A scrape came from the other side of the door, slow and wet, like a mop dragged across tile, and my mind did the stupid thing where it tried to imagine a person cleaning at this hour. The scrape stopped at the window height, and a pale shape rose into view behind the glass. Not a face, not a hand, just the side of something pressed against the glass from the inside, and the shape had too many knuckles. I stepped back so hard my shoulder hit the opposite wall, and the corridor lights dimmed one notch, then another, until the only bright thing was the blue tank glow, bleeding under the door. The building didn't need to chase me. It only needed to change the rules around me. The custodian coughed over the radio, a dry sound that made me picture them alone at the desk, and that picture forced me to move because leaving them with a locked door and a looping radio felt like the start of an obituary. The staff corridor door at my back clicked, once, then twice, the same double sound as before, and the binder rule about 2 clicks snapped into focus like a warning flare. I ran back toward the desk, because a trap only works when someone stays still enough to accept it. The desk area looked the same from the hallway, but the moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Ozone, sharp and clean, like overheated wiring behind a wall. The custodian sat on the floor with their back against the supply closet door, phone in one hand, mop handle in the other, like a useless spear. The map says 2 dots, they said, voice flat with fear. I saw it, I said, because honesty mattered now, and my voice sounded wrong even to me, like it belonged to the building more than it belonged to my throat. The console map now showed 3 dots labeled as me, and the 3rd dot pulsed at the employee door I had just walked through. Maybe this is a test, the custodian whispered, and the line landed clean because it made sense in the ugliest way. Corporate loved tests, and they loved failures even more because failures justify budgets and firings. The hypothesis fork opened in my mind and stayed there, sharp and cruel. Either someone built this as a compliance trap, a way to harvest a scapegoat on probation nights, or something in the building used the systems we trusted as teeth. I chose the first because choosing the second meant admitting I could do everything right and still lose. A drawer under the console held the overnight maintenance phone, an old handset with a coiled cord that always tangled. My fingers shook as I pulled it out, not from fear of the eels, but from fear of being blamed. And that fear forced action. I dialed the internal supervisor line again and waited through one ring, then two. The line picked up with silence. A voice came through, not the supervisor, not anyone I knew, and it used my own tone like it had sampled it off the radio. Repeat it for the log. I slammed the handset down so hard the plastic cracked at the corner, and a red alert popped on the console. Eel Gallery audio active, acknowledgement pending. Acknowledgement. The word sat there like bait. The smeared binder line, the one that told me to repeat the warning, suddenly felt less like a safety instruction and more like a button someone wanted pressed. The coffee smear had blurred one small part of it, and I realized, too late, that I had assumed the missing part was harmless. A paper note lay on the desk under the binder, a scrap I hadn't seen before because it blended with receipts. The paper had a salt stain on it, and the handwriting looked like someone wrote it fast with wet hands. Keep it off camera. Under that, in smaller letters, a second line. Do not speak it back. The unofficial note hit harder than any official binder card, because unofficial warnings come from people who already paid. The custodian stared at the note and then at me. That phrase came from the tank. The console pinged again, demanding acknowledgement, and my chest tightened with a new kind of panic, because in my world, unacknowledged alarms escalate automatically. Escalation triggers door closures. Door closures trap people. I reached for the console keyboard, and my old habit kicked in again. I checked the system time twice before I touched anything. The clock on the console read the correct hour, but the camera feed time overlay didn't match it by a minute. Like two separate clocks argued about reality. That mismatch should have been impossible, and it became my first hard proof that this wasn't just corporate cruelty. A low thump sounded from the Eel Gallery door down the hall. Not a knock, more like a body shifting weight against glass. The custodian's eyes filled, not with tears, but with a bright, angry fear that made them stand. Do not open that door, they said, gripping the mop handle. I'm not opening it, I said, but my brain had already chosen a different door, the service hatch behind the desk that led into the filtration room. If the whisper came through the hydrophone line, then killing power at the source might stop the acknowledgement demand and break the loop. I pushed the custodian back with a flat palm, gentle but firm, because my pro-social reason came sharp. Keep them alive. Keep them out of the corridor where the system could duplicate them the way it duplicated me. Stay in the lit zone, I said, and my voice almost broke, because the lit zone suddenly felt like the only safe country left. The filtration room door stuck the way it always did, swollen from humidity, and I had to shoulder it open, which made my skin crawl because forcing a door never feels like a good omen. Warm, damp air hit my face, heavy with salt and chlorine from the dosing system. And the constant pump hum that should have been comforting sounded wrong, like it had a skip in it. Rows of pipes ran along the wall, labeled with tape that had peeled at the edges, and the hydrophone amplifier sat on a shelf with its little light off, exactly as policy required. Off meant quiet. off meant no whisper. The whisper rolled through anyway, now a vibration in the pipes that made the saltwater line tremble. Keep it off camera. My jaw clenched hard enough to ache because the amp was off. The hydrophone line was off. The building had no business making sound from a dead circuit. My fingers traced the cable run until they found a junction box with a loose screw, and the metal vibrated under my fingertips in small pulses, like a throat clearing. I unscrewed the panel, because competence hates helplessness, and inside I found a cheap little splitter that hadn't been there last month, feeding the hydrophone signal into a second line. Someone had wired the eel tank into the security recording system. That wasn't paranormal, that was deliberate. A harsh shame spike hit me because I had missed it in routine checks, and that spike forced a decision. I yanked the splitter out and stuffed it into my pocket because evidence mattered more than policy now. The moment the splitter left the box, the pump hum stopped completely all at once, and silence hit the room so hard my ears rang. The only sound left was my own breathing and the faint drip of condensation from a pipe elbow, and the drip sped up like it was counting down. The console in the desk area screamed an alarm, muffled through walls, and the custodian shouted something I couldn't make out because the filtration room ate voices. The pumps should not have stopped, and if they stayed off, animals would die. And dead animals make headlines that ruin careers and budgets. The system had me in a vice. Fix the pumps and feed the trap, or ignore the pumps and become the person who let life support fail. My hands moved without asking permission. I hit the manual bypass switch, a big red lever protected by a clear plastic cover that cracked when I flipped it, and the pumps roared back on with a surge that shook the pipes. The bypass cost me light. The ceiling fixture flickered, then went out, leaving me lit only by a thin emergency strip that made the room look like a hallway in a hospital at closing time. A new sound slid into the dark, and it was so specific it made my stomach drop. The slow, wet turn of a paper page once, then again, like someone reading the binder in the dark with damp fingers. No binder sat in the filtration room. I froze because the sound meant something with hands, or something that wanted me to imagine hands, and my brain couldn't stop picturing the smeared rule line being rewritten in real time. The page turn sound stopped, and the whisper returned. Closer, as if it traveled through the pipes straight into my teeth. Repeat it for the log. I backed out of the filtration room blind, one hand on the wall, because staying in darkness with an unseen reader felt like agreeing to be written into the story. My foot caught on the threshold and I almost went down, and that micro-failure snapped me into anger because clumsiness is how people die in quiet places. The custodian stood at the desk with the radio in hand, pressing the talk button like a person ringing a bell for help. The radio only played my own voice, looped and chopped, repeating fragments of sentences I hadn't finished earlier. The console map now showed the eel gallery highlighted in a new color, a deep warning shade that made my skin crawl. A line of text scrolled across the top. Acknowledgement pending. Speak. Phrase into mic. The trap rule wasn't hidden anymore. It was a demand. The custodian's face tightened. Speak it. End this. My brain ran the moral math fast, because the building had chosen this moment to make policy and humanity collide. Speaking might end the alarm and stop doors from sealing, which could save the custodian from getting trapped deeper in the building. Speaking might also hand the system exactly what it wanted. My voice, attached to the whisper my confession made into a key. The unofficial note on the desk, salt-stained and urgent, said, "Do not speak it back." The official binder, coffee-smeared and initialed, told me to repeat it for the log. Both choices left evidence. Both choices had consequences. I felt the weight of my probation, the clinic text, the lie about the walkthrough, and underneath all of it, a simpler pressure. Leaving another adult in danger for the sake of my record would rot me from the inside. I reached into my pocket and pulled the splitter out, holding it up like proof. Someone wired the tank into recording. The custodian stared at the piece of plastic and metal like it was a snake. "So shut, recording." "I tried," I said, and the word "tried" tasted like failure, even though I wasn't allowed to taste anything poetic about it. System wants an acknowledgement, not a fix. The custodian's phone buzzed again, and they flinched, because fear makes the body treat all vibration like threat. "Still no service." My own phone buzzed, and a voicemail notification popped up from the clinic. The small, selfish part of me wanted to listen, wanted to fix my own life first, and that shame made me act in the opposite direction. I shoved my phone under the binder and ignored it. The custodian grabbed the mop handle, then dropped it like it suddenly weighed too much. Door to the south wing closed. I heard it seal. That line forced me into motion because sealing doors meant the building was already escalating without my consent. I ran to the desk console, pulled up the door control panel, and found the Eel gallery listed as held, along with the south wing fire door. The only override option on the screen was labeled with two characters I'd never seen on that panel before: E3. My throat went dry because the quarantine tag wasn't just a tag, it was an override state. The console prompt blinked. E3 override available. Insert phrase. Insert. Not type. Not click. Speak. The system had built a voice lock around a warning phrase, which made my skin crawl because someone had decided fear could be used as a password. The custodian's shoulders shook once, then stilled, and their voice went flat. "Leave now. Leave this place." I couldn't, and not because of courage. Because if I left, the log would say I abandoned a coworker in a sealed wing, and the probation paperwork would turn that into a reason to erase me. Fear of being blamed is a strong leash, and it pulled me into the worst possible choice. I grabbed a roll of clear packing tape from the supply drawer, because a habit from my dad's toolbox taught me tape fixes more than it should. I sprinted down the hall to the Eel gallery door and slapped tape over the little window, covering the glass so the camera couldn't see through it, so the shadow couldn't see me watching. "Keep it off camera." The phrase hit me like a slap, because the unofficial note had been right, and it wasn't just about secrecy. It was about refusing to become footage. I came back to the desk breathing hard, tape stuck to my fingers, and the console alarm dropped in volume, not gone, but muffled, like the system got annoyed. A new alert replaced the old one. Camera occlusion detected. Manual verification required. Manual verification meant someone had to go physically confirm the Eel gallery status, that someone was me and the system knew it, and the map dot labeled as me pulsed at the Eel gallery door again like a finger pointing. The custodian looked at the taped window and then at the smeared binder line. "Rule wants a body in the hall." "Rule wants footage," I said, because words matter when systems listen. I grabbed the binder and flipped to the Eel gallery page again, and now that I looked with anger instead of fear, the coffee smear changed shape. A faint word at the start of the second line emerged under the stain. A ghost of ink I hadn't seen before. It didn't say, "If you hear the warning, repeat it for the log." It said, "If you hear the warning, do not repeat it for the log." One missing word had flipped the entire instruction, and that missing word made my stomach turn. Because the coffee ring wasn't an accident. Someone had smeared that line on purpose. A relief wave hit me, small and sharp, because the trap had a shape now. The real rule was silence, not acknowledgement. The victory wasn't escaping. It was refusing to speak the phrase into the mic. I forced myself to breathe slow because panic makes voices slip, and the system wanted my voice. I typed a manual note into the console incident field, keeping it plain, because plain words don't feed hungry machines. And I selected the option to route the note to the morning team. The moment I hit send, the text field emptied itself, and the note vanished, leaving no confirmation, no copy, no proof that I had written anything at all. Evidence loss, resource cost. The system didn't need to trap my body if it could erase my story. The custodian let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. So nothing gets out. One thing gets out, I said. And I hated how confident the sentence sounded because confidence invites punishment. Paper gets out. I yanked the smeared binder page free at the perforation, tearing it with a sound that made my hands shake, and I shoved it into my pocket next to the splitter. The custodian stared like I'd committed a crime, because technically I had, and that crime felt like the only responsible repair left. The console alarm stopped completely, all at once, and the building fell into normal pump hum again, which should have felt like relief. Relief came, but it came with suspicion, because systems don't stop demanding without a reason. The Eel Gallery highlight on the map faded back to normal blue. Door status changed from held to ready. The badge reader by the desk blinked green again, polite and harmless. The custodian's shoulders sagged. Door opened. I looked at the taped Eel Gallery window in the hall and felt my stomach lift like nausea. The system had given me a seeming victory, a reset, a chance to believe I won, and that made my skin crawl because resets are how traps reset the bait. A soft voice came through the hallway speaker. Not a whisper this time, but a calm recorded tone like a daytime tour guide. It said my job title out loud in the wrong order, and then it said, "Manual verification required." The real rule arrived with the calm tone. The system didn't need my voice anymore, it needed my presence on camera. The custodian backed toward the supply closet, eyes wide. "Do not go." I swallowed hard because leaving the building now would save me, but it would leave the custodian alone when the next demand hit. My duty conflict snapped tight. Self-preservation against a coworker's safety. Policy against decency. My stress reflex returned, wiping my palms on my pants, and it made me angry because it meant my body was already making the choice. I grabbed the desk flashlight, the cheap kind with a rubber grip, and the beam looked weak even on fresh batteries. "Stay behind the desk door," I said, and the words hurt because they sounded like a promise I might break. The custodian nodded once, too stiff. "If doors seal, I break glass. Do not break exhibits," I said, and I almost laughed, because rules always show up when they are least useful. The Eel Gallery hall felt longer on the second walk, and the blue tank glow under the door looked brighter, like the water had turned into light. The tape on the window fluttered once, then stilled, and that tiny movement forced a decision. I peeled the tape back enough to see, because leaving blind means letting the system write the scene for me. The window showed the eel habitat rockwork and the dark water, and for a breath, it looked empty. Then the flashlight beam caught the glass reflection behind me, and the reflection didn't match the hallway. A figure stood at my shoulder in the glass, taller than I was, but the hallway behind me was empty. I spun, and my flashlight beam hit nothing but painted walls, and aquarium posters. My heart hammered in my throat because my eyes had proof in glass that my direct sight couldn't confirm. And that split is where dread lives. The badge reader display by the Eel gallery door flickered and showed the word "held" again. The handle vibrated under my palm in small pulses, and the whisper returned through the metal like it was trying to crawl into my skin. Repeat it for the log. My mouth stayed shut so hard my jaw ached, and in that silence I heard something else, a new layer under the pumps, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on acrylic, moving along the inside of the Eel tank glass. The tapping stopped at the window height. A shape rose behind the glass again, clearer than before, and this time my brain couldn't pretend it was a hand. It was a cluster of pale joints, bending the wrong way, pressed flat against the glass like a display. Tier 3 clarity hit in one ugly still frame. The joints formed a circle around an empty center, and the center held a dark, wet spot that looked like a camera lens. My flashlight beam shook, and the beam caught the little quarantine tag dangling inside the tank area. E3 swinging slowly, and I realized the tag wasn't hanging from a hook. It was tied around something that moved. A hard click sounded from the ceiling camera mount, and the camera rotated down, aiming directly at the window, directly at me. "Keep it off, camera." The phrase hit my mind again, and I didn't know whether it came from the note, from the water, or from the part of me that wanted to survive. I dropped to the floor without thinking, rolling into the blind spot under the window because the camera couldn't see there unless it tilted farther. The camera tilted farther. It shouldn't have, because mounts have limits. This one didn't. I crawled backward down the hall, boots scraping tile, and the moment my back hit the opposite wall, the Eel gallery door unlatch clicked softly. Not open, unlatched, like an invitation. The trap wasn't a locked room, it was an unlocked one. The custodian shouted from the desk end of the hall, voice raw. Door behind desk sealed. That line turned my fear into action because now the system had moved the threat toward the custodian, and my pro-social reason snapped hard. Keep them alive, even if it costs me. I ran to the desk, grabbed the old maintenance handset again, and this time I didn't dial the supervisor line. I dialed the public emergency line, the one that rings in the city dispatch center and records everything by policy, because corporate couldn't erase a public recording as easily. The line rang twice, then picked up with a human voice that sounded tired and annoyed, which felt like a blessing. "Dispatch." "My aquarium," I said, and I kept my voice steady because steady voices get believed. "After hours emergency, doors sealing, co-worker trapped." The dispatcher paused. "Fire alarm active?" "No," I said, and my throat tightened because saying no meant less priority. "Life support system interfering with access." The dispatcher sighed, then said the one line that broke my last hope. "Speak the phrase on the panel." The system had reached outside the building. It had written its trap into the training that humans followed. I felt my stomach drop, because the dispatcher had no reason to know about a phrase, and that meant the phrase lived in some file humans trusted. "Phrase not safe," I said, and the sentence sounded insane, and I hated that it sounded insane. "Send unit. Door control compromised." The dispatcher hesitated, and in that hesitation my shame spike hit, because I knew how this would read. Probationary employee panics, makes claims, wastes resources. The fear of being blamed forced me into the hardest thing. "I tore the rule page," I said. "I have the smeared line, I can prove it." The dispatcher went quiet, then said, "Flat, stay put, help inbound." The line clicked, and I didn't trust the click. The console map blinked, and a new prompt appeared with a calm blue bar. A 3 override, some words, voice match ready. The system didn't need the phrase anymore. It needed my voice match. I stared at the mic icon on the console and realized the trap rule had evolved. The smeared binder line, the coffee ring sabotage, the pop-up demands, all of it had been designed to push me toward speaking, toward feeding the system something it could wear. The custodian banged on the supply closet door from the inside now, muffled and frantic, because the sealed desk door had forced them into the only space with a lock. The building had herded them like an animal, and the thought made my skin crawl because aquariums are expert at controlled environments. I ran to the supply closet and pressed my forehead against the door because closeness matters when people panic. "Hold on," I said, and my voice cracked. And I hated that crack, because cracks get recorded. The custodian's voice came through the door thin. "Something in the hall." "I know," I said, and my breath shook. "Stay low." The console beeped once, then played back my own crackled voice through the hallway speaker, delayed. "Stay low." My blood went cold because the system wasn't just looping, it was archiving. I ripped the unofficial note off the desk and looked at it again, desperate for a clue I hadn't earned. The salt-stained handwriting had one more mark I hadn't noticed, because it sat in the corner. A tiny, simple symbol drawn like a child's doodle, repeated twice. The same symbol sat on the packing tape roll, printed faintly on the cardboard core. And I hadn't questioned it because who questions tape cores? I didn't notice it then, but the same symbol sat on the corner of the Eel gallery camera housing, half scratched off like someone tried to remove it and failed. My brain ran cold. This wasn't one building, this was a system. I made a choice that would split anyone reading this later. And I made it because an adult was trapped behind a door while the building played my voice back like a toy. I stepped to the console mic, not to speak the phrase, but to speak nonsense, to poison the voice match. I leaned in and whispered the most useless string of sounds I could think of, broken and inconsistent, breathy enough to confuse a matcher. The console accepted it for half a second, then rejected it with a single blunt tone. The tone came from the Eel gallery speaker, not the console, and it came with the whisper again, patient and hungry. "Keep it off camera." The console prompt changed. "Manual verification required. Enter gallery." The system didn't want my voice anymore. It wanted my body in frame. I grabbed the binder page from my pocket and the splitter and shoved them into a manila envelope from the desk drawer, one stamped with the aquarium's letterhead that I wasn't supposed to use. My hands shook so hard I couldn't fold the flap clean, and that shaking forced action. I slapped tape over the flap, then wrote a plain address in town from memory. Not a street number, just the name of the city office that handles safety complaints. I didn't trust digital evidence. Paper gets out. The desk printer whined alive on its own, even though I hadn't sent a job, and it spat out a single page of text that made my stomach drop. It wasn't an incident report format with headers. It was a transcript, a clean typed record of my own words from the last hour, arranged like someone had been listening closely. Lines I had spoken to the custodian appeared, along with lines I hadn't spoken at all. One line sat in the middle, isolated, and it used my voice in my head even as I read it. I authorize E3. I had never said authorize. I didn't use that word. I barely knew it in this context. The building had already made a statement in my name. A cold realization landed and stayed. The system didn't need me to confess. It could fabricate compliance and then enforce it. The supply closet door rattled again, the custodian's breath turning into frantic little sobs, and my duty snapped into something almost calm. "Open from inside," I called, because keeping them caged was no longer safety. The building had turned the closet into a pen. The custodian shoved the door open, face wet with sweat, and when they stepped out, the console map dot labeled as me duplicated again, now sitting on the closet threshold like a mark. The Eel gallery door down the hall opened a few inches by itself. A sound came from inside the gallery, not the whisper, not the speaker. A wet slide across tile, slow and heavy like something dragging a bundle. The custodian backed into me and I felt their whole body tremble. "Not human," they whispered, and I didn't correct the sentence because correction felt pointless. I moved us sideways into the filtration room instead, because water systems have valves, and valves have control, and control is how I stay sane. The emergency strip light inside made everything look clinical, and the ozone smell had faded into pure salt and bleach from the dosing line. I slammed the filtration room door and jammed a mop handle under the knob, a cheap containment move that cost me time and dignity. The custodian grabbed my sleeve hard, voice sharp. "Dispatch coming?" "Maybe," I said, and the uncertainty hurt, because it meant my plan relied on strangers who might also be following the trap file. A folder sat on the shelf under the hydrophone amp, one I had never seen before because it blended with the piping. The folder wasn't labeled with a number, it had a plain title in printed letters, "After Hours Training." My stomach turned because that folder name made the human hypothesis too real. Inside were printed screenshots of security footage, not from our cameras, but from other facilities. A warehouse corridor, a gate shack, a motel desk. Each image had the same tiny symbol in a corner, the one on the tape core, the one scratched on our camera housing. A note clipped to the top page had 2 short lines typed clean. "If you hear the phrase, remain silent." Under that, "If you recognize the mark, do not ignore it." The second line used the exact shape of language that training materials love, and I realized the horror wasn't a creature in a tank. It was a compliance program that traveled facility to facility, seeding trap rules into safety culture, then harvesting whoever broke under pressure. The custodian stared at the folder, then at me. "This is everywhere." "Yeah," I said, and the word came out flat because emotion had run out of room in my chest. A heavy thump hit the filtration room door, not hard enough to break it, just enough to remind us it knew where we hid. The mop handle under the knob vibrated with each impact, and the vibration traveled up my arm like a heartbeat. My phone buzzed again. Clinic voicemail. The refill window. The personal cost line rose in my throat, not as a sob, but as a stupid, bitter thought. I did everything right at work and still couldn't protect my own life from a timer. That shame forced action. I hit record on my phone camera and pointed it at the folder pages, at the symbol, at the typed rules. Because if the system erased digital notes, it could still lose control of 1,000 copies. The filtration room light flickered twice, then held steady, and the page turn sound returned for a single slow turn in the dark behind the door, as if something outside us was reading along. The custodian whispered, barely audible, "What now?" Now meant choice. Policy said shelter in place. Human decency said get out before the building decided we were both dots on a map. The system wanted manual verification, wanted a body in the Eel gallery frame, and it had already forged my authorization line. I pulled the emergency water shutoff key from its hook and stared at it, because shutting water would trigger alarms that bring responders faster. But it would also harm animals, and harming animals is a line I didn't want on my soul. The moral dilemma sat heavy, and I chose the option that saved the adult in front of me even if it cost the job, because jobs end. People don't get a second try. I turned the shutoff valve 1/4 turn, just enough to drop pressure and trip the alarm without draining the system. And the filtration pumps changed pitch immediately. A sharp, strained whine. The building screamed alarms down the hall, not just in our console, but through the public speakers, loud enough to wake anyone within blocks. The thumping at the filtration room door stopped. Silence hit again, sharp and complete, and in that silence the whisper came one last time, soft and close, like someone leaning in at my ear. "Keep it off camera." The custodian grabbed my arm. "Door." The filtration room door handle moved slightly, not turning, just shifting, as if someone tested the jam. The mop handle held, but the wood fibers creaked, and creaks mean time running out. I shoved the after-hours training folder under my jacket because hiding evidence felt like theft and also like rescue, and I pushed the custodian toward the back service exit, the one that led to the outside loading pad. The exit had a crash bar, and crash bars don't need badges, which is why they always felt like the only honest part of a building. The crash bar refused to move. A small metal plate above it, usually blank, now displayed 2 characters like a quiet joke. E3. The system had turned the only honest exit into another rule. I keep asking myself what would have happened if I had spoken the phrase into the mic, if I had let my voice become a key and walked out clean with my coworker, leaving the folder on the shelf like it never mattered. My answer changes every day, which is why I taped the envelope to the underside of the supply cart and shoved it out under the loading door gap when the alarm finally forced a human response. Later, when morning staff found me sitting on the wet concrete outside with the custodian wrapped in a spare jacket, the Eel Gallery hydrophone amp was still switched off. No power, no audio feed. Yet the hallway speaker log showed an active mic at 3, and the last line in the erased console transcript kept repeating in my name. "Keep it off camera."